I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents.
Tragedy strikes. Polish people deal with a heavy loss.
Even we live in Brooklyn, our hearts are in Poland.
A story you can count on, making sense of the census.
And if you don't fill out the forms, there will be people coming to knock on your door starting May 1st.
And we'll talk to an author whose book has answers to almost everything.
Jesuit spirituality is about finding God in all things.
Well, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. The people of Poland are mourning the loss of President Lech Kaczynski, who, along with his wife and dozens of others, was killed in a plane crash in Russia Saturday morning.
President Kaczynski is being remembered as a devoted leader and a devoted Catholic. Today I went to the heavily Polish enclave of Greenpoint, Brooklyn, to find out how one local parish is coping during this great time of loss.
For me, it is still like a very bad dream. I cannot even think it's true. I hope that I wake up one moment and it will be gone, but it's not. And suddenly
It was Saturday morning at about 3:30 local time when Father Marek says he first heard about the plane crash that killed the president of his homeland. A text message woke him up, alerting him to the news that Polish President Lech Kaczynski, his wife, and 94 others were killed. Father Marek says he woke up, was glued to the TV for hours, and then had to go celebrate an early morning mass.
When I announced the news to the people, they were shocked, and you could hear the weeping and crying, and I had a hard time to even celebrate the mass because my voice just simply stopped to go out of my throat. I know that many people die every day, but for us, for Polish people, it was a president, his wife, and the elite of the Polish politicians, elite of the Polish intelligence, many priests, two bishops.
President Kaczynski and the other victims had been traveling to Russia to mark the 70th anniversary of the massacre of Polish officers by Soviet secret police. Father Marek says the timing of the crash led to more questions.
John Paul II died 5 years after he established the Divine Mercy Sunday. He died on the vigil of the feast. And now, 5 years later, the crash happened on the vigil of the Divine Mercy Sunday. Is it a sign from God, or is it just a coincidence? We don't want to know at this moment. God gives us so many signs. Maybe it's one of them.
The late president was known for his conservative brand of politics and his deep personal faith. Father Marek says President Kaczynski was a faithful Catholic who attended Mass on a regular basis and governed according to Catholic ideals and teachings.
On Wednesday, we plan to have a memorial Mass at 7 p.m. President Kaczynski and his wife, they were ready for new life. They were practicing Catholics. He was a president, very high figure in the politics, but at the same time, he was going to church. He had his own chapel in the palace. He was attending Mass every day, and this is what we should remember.
There's been an outpouring of emotion and grief from Polish people here in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, over the death of the Polish president and so many others in that tragic plane crash over the weekend. People have brought by candles, pictures, flowers, all to memorialize those who were killed. And I asked Father Marek what he says to parishioners during such a time of sorrow for their homeland.
I don't have words sometimes. I ask them to pray. We elect a good president who would care for Polish people as this one was doing during his entire life.
But why the outpouring of support from Polish Catholics in Brooklyn?
Even we live in Brooklyn, our hearts are in Poland. We have relatives, we have families in Poland. So majority of people who live here, if they can afford it, they go to spend vacation in Poland, they go to see their families.
And there is a special connection between President Kaczynski and Father Marek's parish. The late president visited the church in 2007 and presented clergy with an engraved chalice. For now, Father Marek says his parish and all Polish people must mourn and then look to the future.
Throughout the history of Poland, we have God on the first place. Second important value for us was honor. And the third one was motherland. the country. And we hope that this will be continued, that God, honor, and motherland will be the most important words of Polish politics in the future too.
Well, you heard Father Marek there mention the special Mass for the victims of the crash that's coming up on Wednesday night at his parish. We'll have complete coverage of that Mass on Thursday's edition of Currents.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more of today's show ahead. Coming up, we'll have more reaction to the plane crash that killed Poland's president, this time from a predominantly Polish neighborhood in Chicago. We have that plus the rest of the day's headlines when we return. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, it's not the good book, but it's got the answers to almost everything.
But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Continuing with our coverage of the tragic plane crash from Poland, we take you now to Chicago, where Poles make up the third largest ethnic group. Yesterday, mourners gathered at churches around that city to offer prayers for the victims of the plane crash. We get more from Randy Belasomo.
Thousands from the city's Polish community flooded churches today to pray for a nation and its fallen leaders. St. Constance, St. Stanislaus Kostka, and Holy Trinity Mission all drape the flag and the Polish coat of arms in black. A country and its people are in mourning.
All we can do is just stand before God, counting on His mercy.
The Polish Highlanders stood at attention and with reverence in their traditional garb. The Queen of the Alliance says she was so looking forward to President Kaczynski's visit to Chicago, planned for just weeks from now.
He always loved how we would welcome him, just as if that was his home. And since this happened, everything just kind of crashed.
The plane crash that took the lives of the nation's highest leaders brings back painful memories for many here.
Now, for me, it's like another small cutting.
But Poland and its people, they say, will move forward.
Poles are known for their courage, for their survival skills, and they are also known for their freedom-loving aspirations. So Poland will be fine.
And that is Randy Belasomo reporting. From the Vatican, today for the first time, church guidelines for handling sexual abuse cases involving priests were made public. The Vatican posted the guidelines this morning on its website. They include instructions for bishops and other high-ranking church officials to report abuse to police if required to by law. In Italy, thousands came out Saturday to see the Shroud of Turin, believed by many to be Christ's burial cloth. During its first public display in 10 years, 12,000 pilgrims with reserved tickets were able to enter the Cathedral of Turin for a look at the shroud. Earlier that morning, an opening mass was celebrated, attended by religious and civil leaders, journalists, and the 4,000 volunteers who will provide assistance while the shroud is on public display. Pope Benedict will travel to see the shroud early next month.
Well, the Pope will be racking up plenty of frequent flyer miles this year. Later this week, he'll head to the island nation of Malta for a two-day visit. Nearly 95% of that country's population is Catholic. Next month, it's off to Fatima and the site of reported apparitions of the Virgin Mary in 1917. And later in the year, Benedict takes a much-anticipated visit to the United Kingdom. We get more on that now from Rome Reports.
Benedict XVI's historic visit to the UK in September is key to strengthen the relationship between the two countries. That's according to the UK's man at the Vatican, Ambassador Francis Campbell. For the first time ever, a pope will make an official visit to the UK. John Paul's visit in 1982 was only a pastoral visit.
Some of the features of that will be very much in evidence. For example, the Pope's first engagement will be to meet the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh in the Queen's official residence in Edinburgh.
Ambassador Campbell, the first Catholic to hold this position since the Reformation, says although Catholics only make up 10% of the UK's population, the visit is significant for diplomatic reasons. Campbell says the UK and the Holy See work together on a wide range of policy issues.
For example, disarmament, and the role that the Holy See played, for example, in brokering the Cluster Munitions Treaty, where they worked very strongly with the United Kingdom in the preparatory conferences, thereby allowing a consensus to emerge.
Campbell says both nations also share the same vision on climate change, international development, and interfaith dialogue. In fact, during the Pope's visit, he will also address non-Catholics in the UK.
The Pope will address civil society in Westminster Hall. He will visit the Archbishop of Canterbury at Lambeth Palace. He will do evening prayer in Westminster Abbey.
On September 16th, Pope Benedict XVI lands in Glasgow and then flies to London for 2 days. From there, he'll travel to Coventry for the beatification of Cardinal John Henry Newman, where more than 250,000 people are expected to attend. The Pope's 4-day visit is anticipated to match his predecessor's visit, which took place almost 30 years ago and drew crowds of up to 1 million people.
And as the Pope prepares for his British invasion, the Vatican's newspaper has praise for the band at the forefront of the British invasion here in the U.S. The Roman Observer paid tribute to the Beatles on the 40th anniversary of the band's breakup. The paper writes that despite their known drug use and John Lennon's comment that they were, quote, bigger than Jesus, the Beatles' beautiful melodies changed pop music forever and still give us emotions.
What do you think about that?
I'm all about it. Hey.
I like Beatles music. It's timeless stuff. It is. All right, well, stay tuned. There's much more current straight ahead.
Just ahead, stand up and be counted. News you can use about the census.
We're there to educate the public, make sure they understand that what they fill out is going to be confidential.
Welcome back. Well, just when we've all finished our taxes,
yes.
Well, most of us anyway.
I did.
Now there's another form waiting to be filed. It's the census.
Mm-hmm.
May 1st is actually the official deadline for completing and filing your census forms.
Well, this past weekend, the Census Bureau held a nationwide March to the Mailbox campaign to encourage participation in hard-to-count neighborhoods. And we were there to follow the march in Dyker Heights. In Dyker Heights, a mostly immigrant neighborhood in Brooklyn, response to the 2010 census has been relatively low at around 40%. So volunteers of the Brooklyn Asian Voice Organization, or BRAVO, gathered at St. Rosalia Church to head out on the march and try to improve those numbers.
Right now we're preparing for our March to the Mailbox event. So we will walk as a group to the nearest mailbox to mail our census questionnaire.
I'm holding this.
Neighborhoods like this one and Sunset Park, with high concentrations of recent and undocumented immigrants, pose a challenge to the U.S. Census Bureau because of many immigrants' failure to fill out the forms.
In my house, no, we haven't filled out the census form because we're afraid of immigration agents. It's the only thing.
El miedo a la migración es lo único que tenemos miedo.
He says he knows that there are some that have not filled out their forms, and in his opinion, he believes that they're concerned because some of them are undocumented and they might not have legal status or proper ID. That might be a concern for them. Immigrants are afraid because they're not sure where this information will go. However, it is protected by Title 13 of the U.S. Code, which protects their privacy. There is a lack of awareness, so we're there to educate the public, make sure they understand that what they fill out is going to be confidential.
And churches across the country, like St. Rosalia and Dyker Heights, are helping the Census Bureau in their outreach efforts.
Especially in our parish, we have a large population of Chinese people and Hispanic people who seem to be reluctant to participate in the census. And so through the church, people may feel more secure to fill out their form and to send it back.
The failure to fill out and mail back the forms has a lasting effect in each community. It results in loss of allocated funds, of seats in the House of Representatives, and also costs taxpayers money when the Bureau has to send out representatives who have to personally gather the information.
And if you don't fill out the forms, there will be people coming to knock on your door starting May 1st. So we do encourage everyone to fill out their forms and mail it back.
Right now, Brooklyn's participation is at 45% versus 63% at a national level. But with the March to the Mailbox campaign, the Census Bureau hopes those numbers will climb even higher.
2010!
I think that's really notable, Brooklyn being the city of immigrants, and there's almost a 20% differential between the amount of census forms that have been returned from here versus nationwide. Right. And, you know, it's because of that fear factor, perhaps. But like she said, with Title 13, there is privacy protection. So really, that campaign to get the word out and get them filled out and mailed back is really key. Yeah, and I think people really have to realize here the importance of the census. I mean, it has everything to do with how well we're represented in our government, you know. And the point was also brought up there, a good point, that, you know, if you don't fill out your form and, you know, just send it in, then they're going to have to pay people. The federal government's going to have to pay people to then go out and do that. So, I mean, it's like a waste of time and a waste of money, you know, that kind of thing. So take the form, take 5 minutes, fill mine out in like 5 minutes, send it back, and no problem, no hassle. And your information's safe. It is. I think that that's the main thing. If people can really understand that the information is safe, that your privacy is protected, this is really just to make sure that you have what you need when you live here, and whether it's schools, whether it's any other kind of representation, like you say. Very, very important. Well, stay with us. There's much more Currents just ahead. When we return, his books got everything. Well, almost everything.
I always say I wanted to leave room for a sequel.
Well, finally tonight, everything you always wanted to know about the Jesuits, but were afraid to ask. Author and editor Father James Martin has a new book tackling that very topic. It's called The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. I sat down with him recently to find out more about the book and to find out what Jesuit spirituality can tell us about the world today. Father James Martin, thank you so much for joining us here today on Currents. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Well, The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything is the name of the book. Now, what is the book about?
Right, well, I always say I wanted to leave room for a sequel, so it's The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. Basically, it's the first mainstream introduction to the way of St. Ignatius Loyola, who was the founder of the Society of Jesus in 1540. And Jesuit spirituality has been around for that long. And it's often understood by Catholic audiences, but this book really tries to present the way of Ignatius, which is about finding God in all things, to everybody, to people who have never heard of the Jesuits, to people who might not even be Catholic or Christian or even believing, to seekers. And it's about finding God in all things, finding freedom, learning how to make good decisions, being a good friend, falling in love, learning how to work, living simply, you know, really in, as the title says, almost everything. Now, Father, I know you've written several books. What made you write this book at this particular point in time? Well, you know, I had a book called My Life with the Saints that came out in 2006 that did pretty well. And Harper One, who used to be called Harper San Francisco, said, well, what would you really like to write next? And I said, well, you know, there really isn't a nice introduction to Ignatian spirituality out there. And so originally I started off with a very small book, and it grew and grew and grew because, you know, if you cover almost everything, it has to get larger. So I wanted to communicate that message because Ignatian spirituality is really very powerful and has really been very appealing to a lot of people, but I think frequently it's not described to the general audience in a very accessible way. So what I was trying to do was make it inviting and accessible and basically user-friendly.
Give me kind of the Reader's Digest version, if you will, of what's contained in this book, if you had to sum up Jesuit spirituality for me.
Sure. Well, I say 4 things in the book. Jesuit spirituality is about finding God in all things, first of all, so not just in church or scripture, but really in your daily life. Second of all, being a contemplative in action, having a contemplative stance in the middle of our active, busy lives. Third, seeing God in an incarnational way, meaning incarnate in different people and in the world, not just out there, but really here, right before us. And then last, fourth, seeking freedom and detachment. So freedom would be freedom from anything that keeps us from moving closer to God, and detachment from things that keep us really bound to our old ways of doing things. So you could say any of those things or all of those things, and that would be a good definition of Jesuit spirituality.
Great. Well, the book is called, once again, The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. Father, where can we find it now?
So the book is available now in bookstores everywhere, as they say, as well as on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and on HarperCollins' website. So you really, anywhere you buy good books, you can buy The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. And you can buy several copies if you want.
All right. Well, Father James Martin, thank you so much for joining us today here on Currents. We appreciate your time, sir.
My pleasure.
He says not so subtly.
I know. Buy several copies if you'd like. But no, Father Martin, I am a big fan of his because he's just so intelligent and knows how to tell you and explain things on a level that you can really understand. And he knows a lot about a lot of different things too.
Yeah, he certainly does. And one of the things that he was talking about that I thought was interesting is, you know, explaining the different points, obviously, about sort of what is the roots of the Jesuit philosophy, right. And that you can find God in other people and other things readily, because that wasn't always the case in the church. You know, the church has a long and storied history, and so that's part of it, and also the detachment, which reminds me a little bit of Buddhism or some other, you know, theologies that are out there. So
yeah, it's a great you know, thing to learn sort of the origins of Jesuit spirituality, because I think, you know, it came from you know, a very, you know, sincere place, a very sincere way of looking at the faith that might have been different from, you know, the way that other people looked at it, and finding the spiritual in the everyday thing, I think, is the big part of it. So yeah, it's very good. And Father Martin, of course, someone great to talk about it.
He is. He's so learned. All right, well, that is it for tonight's edition of Currents. Tomorrow we'll have the latest on the Polish plane crash. And meantime, remember, we are always online at currentsny.net, and you can follow us on Twitter. You can also become our fan on Facebook as well. We appreciate our fans. Until next time, I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.